So, Noga, we only met about an hour ago for the very first time, and one of the facts I discovered about you was that you were at Arts Ed. You are at Arts Ed studying, and Arts Ed is where my daughter left last year, so that's one connection that we have. Can you give me some thoughts as to how you became to be described as a climate activist?
So, I first heard about climate change when I was about 6. I was brought in, the whole school was brought into this assembly, and they said to us, they showed us a picture of what looked like some clouds pretty much, and they said to us, this is the ozone layer, and there's a hole in it. And we were like, that's not good. And then they said, the way you can solve that is all your dads, all your fathers, all the men in your life, all that shaving cream they're using, that comes in aerosol cans. So that is what's responsible for this ozone layer breaking down. You need to go home, you need to tell them to stop. And we were like, right, okay. And no pressure on our families. Went home, told them to stop using aerosol cans, and that was it. And we didn't hear about climate change until last year when I was doing my GCSEs, and they said, this is what climate change is, this is what recycling does, these are all these little things you can do to shop your way out of this crisis. And it seemed so bizarre to me at the time. You know, how can one person save the planet just by using a bamboo toothbrush? How is that possible? You know, so then this year, we got together and we said, right, this is not how the world works. You know, if I click my fingers, I can't just save the planet. I have to get out there and make it known that I'm deeply, deeply unhappy about where we're going. And so earlier this year, I joined the first youth strike back in February. And I remember all these kids standing around and screaming and chanting and saying, we have 12 years left, we have 12 years left. And for me, as someone who's never really been much into science, it was a very simple statement. You know, it was we have 12 years left and that's it. And if we don't change our entire political system, our entire economic model, then we'll be stuck like this, watching our climate break down to the point where we have to face this impending environmental doom, and we can do nothing about it because those in power aren't changing anything. And so we got up and we grabbed megaphones and we marched down, and we've been marching this whole year, and we'll keep on marching. And for me, I think every time we organize another strike, every time the Student Climate Network gets together and goes, right, well, this is not too good, let's do something about it. I think it's more than just the science for me that's a reminder, it's the emotion behind it. It's the fact that young people are finally standing up and going, we are so angry about this, and you never asked us. You called us snowflakes, and you said to us that we didn't understand the science, but we're here, and we're not going away.
So that's really interesting, because for the last 30 years, I use bamboo metaphor as, bamboo toothbrush as my metaphor, right? Bamboo toothbrushes are not going to save the world. And it was interesting to see that picture earlier on about Earthrise, because with our digital footprints that we have, I was taking a break from my job in the city, and I was writing a bit of a blog, and I can almost pinpoint to the day when I posted something online with that picture, that Earthrise picture, and I wrote to my my hopefully future grandchildren, right? I got 2 children. This was about 4 years ago, so my children were, at the time, 15 and 20. And the tagline of this blog was, Stories for My Grandchildren, which is a bit of a play on words. James Hansen wrote this book, Storms of My Grandchildren. And the tagline was something along the lines of, if your children won't listen to you, perhaps your future grandchildren might. And I remember being almost frantic in the way that I wrote this blog. I realized the seriousness. I went back for a couple of years back into the workplace. I worked for a pension company. And then the summer of last year, the oppressive heat of that summer, the IPCC 1.5 report, and then this paper called Deep Adaptation by Jem Bendell, I suddenly couldn't ignore it anymore. And I suddenly thought, teaching young people like yourself to save for 30 or 40 years into a pension so that they will be secure financially in their retirement, it almost felt fraudulent in some senses when here's Jem Bendell talking about societal collapse in the next 10, 15 years. So I think anger's really, really good, and that's really what the youth strikers have.
How can we start saving for retirement if we don't know that we'll still have jobs in 20 years? If we come at this with a solution of, okay, let's just shut out all gas infrastructure, let's shut down all the coal mines, and let's just leave it, we don't know about that either. So I think there's this real anger of the fact that we have a clear solution. You know, we as young people have been calling for the Green New Deal. We've been calling for a just transition to make sure that people can still keep their jobs, to make sure that people can still keep living, not just surviving during climate breakdown, but can keep living a good and healthy and happy life. And yet everyone seems to be ignoring that. And I think our anger has just grown over the past year, really, as, you know, this initial feeling of, okay, great, they're hearing us, turns to they're hearing us, but they just don't care, or they're not listening. And I think it also is that moment of, actually, sometimes it's less about our future. We're often coming from a real place of privilege when we think about our future as leaders and owners and CEOs and as business people, but also as just people. And watching the suffering of other people around the world right now, people in the global south, people in the Pacific who have been fighting for their lives for years and years and years, that's not about their future, that's about now. You know, if we don't act now, that every second that goes by, that is another life that is thrown into this void of huge risk. And we can't keep acting as if we've got the time to make the decisions for our future, to figure that out. We have to go, if we don't turn around right now, if we don't change the way we work and make it about people, make it so that people who've been working in high carbon sectors can now move to low carbon sectors and still live a good life, then we are throwing our moral authority into the wind.
So people will turn around and say, but you're being too emotional, right? I mean, the British government is committing to net zero, and we're doing better than anybody else, right? We're committing to net zero. We've done far more. It's all about China and India and all that sort of stuff. But you see, anger's really, really good. I've been thinking, I think the science almost feels like it's decided, right? The science is decided. So what stops people like you and me? So I'm really interested. You're 17. I've got a 19 and a 24-year-old now. My 24-year-old son thinks I'm an idiot, right? He says, Dad, Elon Musk is going to save the world, and you would have been far better staying working for Nest Pensions than giving up your job. He was obviously thinking about his inheritance, right? So, Dad, you should have stayed at that pension company. And I think he's wrong. But the interesting thing is my 19-year-old, who showed zero interest in politics, suddenly finds herself out on the streets one of those Fridays holding up a sort of Extinction Rebellion banner that said something like, we're and you know, it was slightly embarrassing, but it was great to see her get that passion. So what makes one of your peers care about this and another of your peers just get on with life and just completely disengage from this subject?
I think it's been really hard. It's been really hard to explain to people that we are in the midst of societal collapse, that we are watching ourselves effectively just steer ourselves over the brink and to extinction. Because sometimes when you scare people too much, they're paralyzed and they can't do anything, they can't take to the streets. But then, so my younger brother, he's 13, and he knew about climate change, but again, he thought, okay, I'll just recycle and it will all be fine. And he actually initially, he didn't want to come on strike. He didn't want to separately, go and help out with the XR stuff. And then he thought, actually, this is the only thing I can do. It's why when people come up to me and they say, okay, you've been organizing these youth strikes, like I trust your opinion, I trust your emotion and your science on this. What can I do? What's the best thing for me to do to help the planet? Because I do care. I'm just stuck because no one's ever told me that I have the power within society to change things. And I say to them, you have to come on strike. Or you have to volunteer your time for the Student Climate Network or to join groups like Extinction Rebellion, because that is the greatest use of what you have. I think people are aware of the science most of the time. If they're not, if they're a denier, and sometimes it's almost best to not engage. Sometimes you just have to get out there and say, look at us marching. How can you not believe that what we're marching for is so strong?
So I'd like to come in there because the interesting thing for me is that for too long it's been pushed onto the individual. You've got to buy that bamboo toothbrush, right? And you've got to walk more. And was it the CEO of Shell that said you've got to eat seasonally, right? I mean, how ridiculous was that? And so I think you have to be authentic in order to speak, to stand as you've stood in front of crowds. You have to be authentic. So what are the two biggest things that an individual can do is to fly less, if at all, and to stop eating meat. Changes to your diet. We're not always saying you'll never eat a steak again. That may be for some people. But if you talk the talk, but you don't walk the walk, then you really are on sticky ground. I mean, just yesterday I saw Piers Morgan. I've seen a couple of times over the last few days media personalities, white, male, middle-class media personalities attacking young women of colour about the fact that they're hypocrites on the streets of London. And it just doesn't sit right with me. Any thoughts on that?
I mean, of course it doesn't sit right. The same people that are laughing at protesters are the same people who stand to benefit from the climate crisis. Because what the climate crisis is an injustice. It's the same societal injustice that social justice movements in the past, like the civil rights movement, like the suffragettes movement, have had to continually fight. That is the same struggle. It's the struggle against colonialism. It's the struggle against imperialism. That's what the climate crisis is born out of. So of course we're going to get people laughing at us. Of course we're going to get people jeering us, saying we're too young, we're too emotional, or we don't really understand what to do. Yes, maybe we're quite young. Maybe that's a real power that we have. And I think it's certainly a sign that a lot of the leaders right now are young people who are saying, we have the highest stakes in this. We have the most to lose. So of course we're emotional. Of course we're angry, because you're sat there benefiting off of our pain and our suffering and then laughing at us about it.
Yeah. People call me too emotional, right? Because sometimes, and I remember I was giving this presentation to a law firm, Bates Wells actually, last week, and I hesitated before I showed this picture. I thought, nah, Andrew, you'll be all right? And I showed this picture of why I would be marching on the streets, why I would be rebelling this week and next week in London. And it was a picture of my father, 85 years old, my children, my wife, my dogs. And as this slide came up, it caused me to choke. I had to pause for a few minutes. And I think we have to recognize our grief. I mean, Kevin Anderson, the climate scientist, I reached out to him when Piers Morgan, it was Adam Bolton on Sky said, Extinction Rebellion have an extreme view of the science. So I tweeted this and I said, Kevin, what do you think? His answer, we have an extreme future ahead of us. We either have extreme changes to our economy and our business practices that will allow us to reach the 1.5 degree targets that the IPCC say, or we have an extreme future of climate breakdown, ecological breakdown, and mitigation. So whatever we look, it's going to be extreme. The question is, which of those do we choose? One final question, Noga, for the audience here. If it wasn't just me and you sitting on this sofa, is there one thing that you would ask them to do as business leaders?
Yeah, I would. I mean, I'm lucky that you're all here, so I can actually ask you this question. Look, we've been campaigning for reform. We've been campaigning for a Green New Deal. We've been campaigning for a fundamental change to our economy and the way we work and the way we think about well-being and profit and where that profit is going and who it's going to. And so, my question is, why haven't you signed on to the Green New Deal yet? Why haven't you committed to a just transition for workers in your companies? Why haven't you said, we'll reduce our carbon whilst making sure that we're investing in renewables, while making sure that we can support that transition the best we can? Because to be a leader of any company, of any model, of any organization, you have to support the people that you are leading, that you are supporting. And that means that you have to look at the climate crisis and go, let's do something about this to make our lives healthier and happier and more sustainable. Because equity and sustainability are not separate things. They go hand in hand. If we don't look at that together, I'll walk out this room very, very disappointed.
I would love to speak to you all morning about this, but we're out of time, so we must leave.